My parents gave my twin brother $400,000 for his revolutionary business while telling me to figure it out myself. The fallout after he failed and they lost everything was so sweet. All right, guys, strap in because this story is absolutely wild and I'm still processing how perfectly everything worked out. This happened over the past 2 years, and the ending is so satisfying I had to share it with you all. Fair warning, this is going to be long, but trust me, every word is worth it for that ending. Background: I, 29, female, have a twin brother, Blake, who's obviously also 29M. We grew up in Phoenix in what you'd call an upper middle class family. Dad runs a successful plumbing supply business that he built from nothing, and Mom works as a loan officer at a credit union. Not wealthy, but definitely comfortable. Nice house in the suburbs, good cars, family vacations, all that stuff. Here's where it gets interesting, though. From day one, Blake was the golden child, and I was the afterthought. I'm talking about a level of favoritism so obvious that family friends used to comment on it. Blake was the smooth talker, the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of anything. I was the quiet one who actually got things done, but never got credit for it. The favoritism was so blatant that our extended family started making jokes about it at gatherings. "Oh, there's Blake the prince, and Lolita the worker bee," my uncle would say, thinking he was being funny. My aunt would always ask about Blake's latest achievements while barely acknowledging my presence. Even my grandparents got caught up in it. Blake got savings bonds for every birthday while I got practical gifts like work gloves or tool sets. So, 3 months ago, we're all at Sunday dinner at my parents' house like we do every week. Blake shows up with this huge grin and his girlfriend Emma practically bouncing with excitement. Emma, by the way, is the definition of a gold digger who's been working on Blake for 2 years to think bigger and stop settling for employee life. Blake stands up like he's about to give some grand speech. "Family, I have huge news. I'm starting my own business, and it's going to revolutionize the home improvement industry." My dad immediately perks up because anything Blake does is automatically amazing in his eyes. "Tell us more, son." Blake launches into this presentation about his game-changing business idea. He wants to start a luxury home renovation company that specializes in high-end sustainable upgrades for wealthy homeowners. His pitch was basically that rich people want expensive, eco-friendly renovations, but don't know how to find quality contractors who can handle luxury projects. He had this whole speech prepared about market gaps and untapped demographics and how he was going to disrupt the traditional contracting model. The guy was using buzzwords he'd obviously learned from watching YouTube videos about entrepreneurship. Emma was nodding along like he was delivering the Gettysburg Address, occasionally adding helpful comments like, "Blake has such vision, and this is exactly what the market needs." What really got me was how prepared this whole presentation was. Blake had clearly practiced this pitch multiple times, probably with Emma coaching him on what to say. He had talking points about target demographics, profit margins, and growth potential. All complete nonsense, but delivered with the confidence of someone who actually knew what they were talking about. I'm sitting there thinking, this sounds like every other home renovation company, but with fancier marketing. But my parents, they're acting like Blake just invented electricity. "This is incredible, Blake," my mom gushes. "You're going to transform people's homes and help the environment." Then Blake drops the bomb. The best part is, Mom and Dad have agreed to fund the startup. They're investing $400,000 to get Blake Home Innovations off the ground. I nearly choked on my food. $400,000 for a business idea that was basically renovations but expensive. My dad turns to me with this proud smile. "We're investing in Blake's future, Lolita. This is his chance to build something really special." Now here's the thing that made my blood boil. 18 months ago, I had approached them about starting my own general contracting business. I had spent months preparing a detailed business plan. I had lined up 3 major clients ready to sign contracts. I had researched equipment costs and labor needs, and I had even secured preliminary quotes from suppliers. You know what my parents told me? "Lolita, you've always been resourceful and independent. You're smart enough to figure this out on your own. Blake needs more support than you do." That word independent, like it was some kind of character flaw that I could handle my own problems. The difference between Blake's idea and mine? I wanted to start a legitimate general contracting business, focusing on middle-class home improvements and small commercial projects. I had real clients, real contracts, and a realistic plan to be profitable within 6 months. Blake had a fancy name and a vague idea about targeting rich people. But Blake was getting $400,000 handed to him while I was told to figure it out myself. To understand how messed up this family dynamic is, I need to give you the full background because this favoritism started when we were literally babies. Blake came out first. I followed 4 minutes later. According to family stories, Blake cried loudly and demanded attention while I was quiet and looked around taking everything in. My parents always said this set the tone for our personalities, and apparently their parenting approach too. Growing up, Blake was the outgoing kid who made friends easily and played sports. I was more reserved, preferred working with my hands, and learned practical skills from my carpenter grandfather. Guess which approach our parents celebrated? Every single baseball game Blake played, and he was average at best, my parents were there with coolers, foam fingers, and professional cameras, acting like he was heading to the major leagues. When I won first place at the regional woodworking competition in high school, they missed the ceremony because Blake had a tournament the same weekend. The woodworking competition was actually huge. I'd spent 6 months crafting an intricate oak bookshelf with hand-cut dovetail joints and custom brass hardware. The judges were blown away. I got a trophy, a $500 scholarship, and my project was featured in the local newspaper. My parents' response? "That's great, honey. Did Blake's team win their game?" Meanwhile, Blake's baseball achievements were treated like national news. Base hit in a meaningless game, Dad called his friends to brag. Made varsity as a sophomore because half the seniors graduated early. Mom threw a celebration dinner for the extended family. In high school, Blake wanted to take his girlfriend to prom in style, so Dad rented him a limousine and bought an expensive tuxedo. When I wanted to buy tools to start doing small carpentry jobs to earn money, I had to save up from my part-time job because it builds character to work for what you want. College was more of the same pattern. Blake struggled with his business classes, hovering around a 2.5 GPA and needing constant tutoring. Guess who paid for that? When he almost got kicked out for academic probation junior year, my parents hired him a team of tutors at $40 per hour. They spent over $8,000 that semester alone. Meanwhile, I maintained a 3.6 GPA while working 25 hours a week at a construction supply company. When I made Dean's List 3 semesters in a row, they said, "We expect nothing less from someone as capable as you. No celebration dinner, no proud phone calls, just expectations." The summer before senior year, Blake wanted an unpaid internship at some California startup because it would look good on his resume. My parents paid for his San Francisco apartment for 3 months, probably $15,000 total. Blake spent that summer posting Instagram photos from trendy restaurants, learning nothing about actual business. That same summer, I worked full-time for a commercial contractor, gaining real experience in project management, cost estimation, and client relations. But because I was earning money instead of costing money, my parents saw it as less valuable than Blake's expensive California adventure. After college, Blake bounced between jobs for 3 years, getting fired from 4 different companies for poor performance and attendance. Each time he'd move back home while my parents supported him emotionally and financially. Marketing agency, too corporate. Real estate company, unrealistic expectations. High-end furniture store, where he got caught sleeping in the break room. Construction sales, beneath his skill level, apparently. The worst part was watching Blake become more entitled with each bailout. Emma encouraged this attitude constantly, telling him he was too talented for traditional employment and destined for greatness. When I graduated and got hired, making $45,000 at a construction company, they barely acknowledged it. I was learning the business from experienced contractors. But my parents were so focused on Blake's career journey that steady employment seemed boring and unremarkable. Meanwhile, I had been working construction for 6 years, developing relationships with suppliers, subcontractors, and clients. I had hands-on experience with every aspect of the business, but none of that mattered because I was the independent one who didn't need help. The week after the big announcement, I asked Blake if I could look at his business plan. Just curiosity about this revolutionary idea worth $400,000. "It's still being refined," he said, "but the concept is rock solid." Red flag number 1. I pushed for more details. "What's your target market analysis? How many potential clients have you identified in the Phoenix area?" Blake got this confused look he always got when someone asked for specifics. Well, there are tons of wealthy people here who want nice renovations. It's a huge market. That's not market analysis, that's just stating obvious facts. Over the next month, I watched this disaster unfold in slow motion. Blake had no real business plan, no client base, no partnerships with suppliers, no understanding of construction licensing requirements, no insurance plan, and no realistic timeline for profitability. I tried asking him basic questions that any legitimate contractor would be able to answer. What's your average project timeline? He didn't know. How do you calculate labor costs? He had no system. What's your markup on materials? He'd never thought about it. How do you handle permit applications? He didn't even know permits were required for most renovation work. The licensing situation was particularly ridiculous. In Arizona, you need a contractor's license for any project over $1,000, which requires passing examinations on building codes, safety regulations, and business practices. Blake hadn't even looked into the licensing process. When I mentioned this to him, he waved it off, saying he'd figure that out later and that licensing was probably just bureaucratic red tape anyway. Even more concerning was his complete lack of understanding about insurance and liability. Construction work involves significant risks, and any legitimate contractor needs comprehensive liability insurance, workers' compensation coverage, and bonding. Blake had no idea these things existed, let alone how much they cost or how to obtain them. When I explained that insurance alone would probably cost $15,000 to $20,000 per year for his type of operation, he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. What he did have was a logo that Emma designed using some online tool and a 2-page business overview that looked like a high school project. The logo was this generic house icon with some swooshy green elements that were supposed to represent sustainability. The business overview was full of meaningless buzzwords about synergistic solutions and paradigm-shifting approaches, but contained zero actual information about operations, pricing, or target markets. But my parents were already writing checks. "We've opened a business account for Blake," my dad announced at the next family dinner. "The first $150,000 is already deposited to get things started." I was stunned. "Dad, have you seen actual financial projections? Like real numbers showing how this business will make money?" My mom jumped in with, "Lolita, not everyone needs to analyze everything to death like you do. Sometimes you have to trust someone's entrepreneurial instincts." Entrepreneurial instincts, right? Meanwhile, I had been working overtime and saving every penny to fund my own business. I had $35,000 saved up and was still $20,000 short of what I needed to buy equipment and cover initial expenses. I could have launched my contracting business and been profitable within months, but I was doing it the independent way while Blake got handed everything. The situation got even more ridiculous when Emma started posting on social media about being an entrepreneur's girlfriend and how excited she was to be disrupting the home improvement industry. She created an Instagram account documenting their business journey with staged photos of Blake pretending to review blueprints at coffee shops. Emma's Instagram posts were absolutely cringeworthy. She'd post photos of Blake sitting at Starbucks with his laptop open, captioned with things like, "My CEO grinding away on revolutionary business strategies." The blueprints in these photos were actually just printouts of generic house plans Blake had downloaded from free websites. She also started a business blog where she wrote weekly posts about the entrepreneur lifestyle and gave advice about supporting your partner's business vision. Emma had zero experience in business or construction, but she was positioning herself as some kind of expert advisor. The most ridiculous part was when Emma started selling business mindset coaching sessions through her Instagram, charging $150 for 1-hour phone calls where she'd supposedly help women unlock their partner's potential. The fact that people actually paid for this showed how good Emma was at selling fantasy. Meanwhile, Blake was eating up all this attention and validation. He genuinely believed that Emma's social media hype was evidence of his business success. He'd show our parents Emma's posts as proof that he was building something significant, and they'd nod approvingly at the professional marketing approach and brand-building strategies. It was embarrassing to watch, but my parents thought it showed great business mindset and brand building. 4 months after the initial funding, Blake's business was already falling apart, but you'd never know it from listening to him at family dinners. "How's the client acquisition going?" I'd ask, knowing the answer. "Really well," Blake would say confidently. We're in final negotiations with several high-value prospects. Complete nonsense. I knew he hadn't landed a single client because he'd asked me to look at some project estimates he was putting together. The estimates were wildly unrealistic, either way, too high or way too low, and showed he had no understanding of actual construction costs. Emma was pushing Blake to spend more money on business development and market positioning. They'd blown through $80,000 on completely unnecessary expenses, like a fancy office space in an upscale area, new vehicles with custom wrapping, expensive marketing materials, and networking events that were basically just expensive dinners. My parents remained completely oblivious because Blake was feeding them updates about promising meetings and potential partnerships. Anytime I asked specific questions, Blake would deflect, or Emma would claim the details were confidential for competitive reasons. Meanwhile, my own plan was moving forward slowly but steadily. I had finally saved enough to buy a work truck and basic equipment. I was taking on small projects during weekends and evenings, building a client base and reputation. I had 3 customers lined up for major projects once I could go full-time. But every time I mentioned my progress to my parents, they'd brush it off with comments like, "That's nice, Lolita," before immediately asking Blake about his latest business developments. The cognitive dissonance was incredible. Things reached a breaking point during Christmas dinner. Blake and Emma showed up wearing expensive new clothes and talking about how exciting everything was and how they were about to land some major contracts. Blake was wearing a $400 designer sweater and new Italian leather shoes that probably cost $300. Emma had on a dress that I recognized from a high-end boutique where nothing cost less than $200. They were both carrying the latest iPhones and Apple Watches, and Emma was sporting a new designer handbag that I'd seen in a magazine for $800. All of this purchased with our parents' startup funding, of course. The conversation at dinner was nauseating. Blake kept dropping hints about big meetings and exciting developments without providing any specific details. Emma would chime in with comments about how proud she was of Blake's vision and leadership, and how they were building something that would change everything. "Who are these potential clients?" I asked. Blake got that panicked look again. "Well, we're working with several property developers." "Which developers?" "I can't really say because of confidentiality agreements." This was obviously nonsense. Blake didn't have any confidentiality agreements because he didn't have any real clients. He was making vague references to developers because it sounded impressive, but he couldn't name anyone specific because the meetings didn't actually exist. Emma jumped in. "Lolita, why are you being so negative? Can't you just support your brother's success?" The word success coming from Emma was particularly galling. She was defining success as spending other people's money on fancy offices and designer clothes rather than actually completing projects or generating revenue. In Emma's world, looking successful was the same as being successful, and Blake was buying into this delusion completely. "Success? What success? You've burned through $200,000 and haven't completed a single project." That's when my mom dropped another bomb. "Actually, Blake needs additional funding to really scale the business. We've agreed to provide another $200,000 to expand operations." The casual way she announced this, like it was a small favor rather than a massive financial commitment, showed how completely disconnected my parents were from reality. They were talking about $200,000 like it was lunch money, even though this amount represented years of savings and a significant portion of their retirement security. I put down my fork. "You're giving him another $200,000? "It's an investment in his future," my dad said defensively. "He's building something that could be worth millions." "Based on what evidence? Has he shown you any completed projects, any satisfied customers, any revenue at all?" Silence around the table. "Have you seen proof that he spent the first $200,000 on actual business expenses?" More silence. My dad's face was getting red. "Lolita, Blake doesn't need to justify every business decision to you. We believe in his vision." His vision? The guy who's never successfully completed anything in his life, the guy who got fired from 4 jobs, the guy who needed tutoring to pass basic business classes. That vision? Emma started fake crying about how I was being cruel and unsupportive. Blake was accusing me of being jealous and unable to handle his success. I stood up from the table. "You want to know what's really messed up about this situation? 18 months ago, I came to you with a detailed business plan, realistic financial projections, actual clients ready to sign contracts, and 6 years of industry experience." You told me to figure it out myself because I was independent. Now Blake shows up with a fancy logo and some vague ideas about targeting rich people, and you're ready to give him $400,000. That's different, my mom said weakly. How is it different? Blake needs more guidance and support. No, Blake needs accountability, but you've never required that from him. So now he thinks he can just coast through life while other people pay for his mistakes. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Don't call me when this whole thing collapses, because it will. I didn't speak to my family for 3 months after that Christmas dinner, but I didn't need to talk to them to know how things were going with Blake's business. My buddy who works in commercial construction texted me in March. Hey, isn't your brother the guy trying to start that high-end renovation company? Word around town is he's burned through a ton of money and never finished a single project. Around the same time, my own business was taking off. I had officially launched Lolita's General Contracting and was booked solid for the next 4 months. I was pulling in $25,000 per month and growing steadily. I had moved into a nice apartment and bought a reliable work truck with my own money. The best part? I hadn't told my family any of this. As far as they knew, I was still working for someone else and struggling to get my business off the ground. In April, Blake finally called me. Hey, Lolita, can we talk? His voice sounded completely defeated. What's up? Listen, I know we haven't talked since Christmas, but Emma and I broke up. Of course they did. I'm sure that had nothing to do with the money running out. Sorry to hear that, I lied. And the business? Well, we're restructuring. Restructuring. That's business speak for we failed but don't want to admit it. What happened? It turns out the luxury renovation market is more complicated than we initially thought. There were licensing issues we didn't anticipate, and the startup costs were higher than projected. Translation, we blew through $400,000 and never completed a single paying project. So what's your plan now? Well, that's why I'm calling. I was hoping we could meet up and talk. I have some ideas about maybe working together on your construction stuff. I almost laughed. Now he wanted to work with me, after spending 2 years acting like my business plans were some small-time hobby. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. 2 weeks later, my dad called. This was unusual because my dad never called unless someone was in the hospital or he needed something urgent. Lolita, we need to have a serious conversation. About what? It's about Blake and about our financial situation. There it was. What about your finances, Dad? Your mother and I made some serious mistakes. We gave Blake too much money too quickly, and he wasn't prepared to handle that kind of responsibility. This was the closest thing to admitting fault I'd ever heard from my father. How bad is it? Long pause. Dad, how bad is it? All of it. The entire $400,000 is gone, plus another $75,000 we borrowed against the house when Blake said he just needed a little more to turn things around. $475,000 gone. No completed projects. No revenue, no assets to show for it, just gone. Dad! Lolita, we need your help. And there it was, the real reason for the call. What kind of help? I asked. We're in serious financial trouble. Your mother's job doesn't pay enough to cover our mortgage payments, and I had to take a loan against my business inventory to fund Blake's startup. If we can't make these payments, we could lose everything. I let that sink in. My parents had borrowed against their house and Dad's business, the business that supported their entire lifestyle, to fund Blake's fantasy renovation company. How much do you owe total? Around $350,000 in various loans and credit lines. If we can't get help, we'll lose the house, and I might have to sell the business. Everything. The house I grew up in. Dad's business that he'd spent 20 years building. Their retirement security. All of it gambled away on Blake's ridiculous business idea. Lolita, I know we haven't always treated you fairly. I know we favored Blake, and I know we should have supported your business when you asked. But you're our daughter, and we heard you're doing well now, and we desperately need help. How did he know I was doing well? I hadn't told him anything about my success. I've been asking around about your contracting business, he continued. People in the industry say you're making good money and getting great reviews, that you're booked solid for months. Ah, so now that Blake had failed spectacularly and I was successful, suddenly they were interested in what I was doing. Dad, let me ask you something. If Blake's business had succeeded and he was making tons of money right now, would you be calling me for help? Silence. Or would you be calling Blake? More silence. Lolita, please, we're family. Family. Where was that family loyalty when I was working overtime to save money for my business while they handed Blake everything he wanted? I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. But I had already made my decision. I didn't call them back for 3 weeks. During that time, my business hit a major milestone. I had signed contracts worth $200,000 over the next 6 months and hired 2 full-time employees. I was officially more successful than Blake had ever dreamed of being. I also did some research into their financial situation. Through some industry contacts and public records, I found out exactly how desperate things were. They had mortgaged their house to the maximum. Dad's business was leveraged to the breaking point, and they were about 2 months away from defaulting on multiple loans. Finally, I arranged to meet them at a restaurant to discuss their proposal. I chose an upscale place that I knew they couldn't really afford anymore, but would feel obligated to suggest splitting the bill. The restaurant was one of those trendy steakhouses where appetizers start at $20 and entrees are $40 to $50. I picked it deliberately because I wanted them to feel the financial pressure of their situation while we discussed their request for help. It was petty, but after years of being treated like the responsible one who didn't deserve support, I was ready to be a little petty. When they walked in, I could see the stress on their faces. Dad looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past few months. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and he had that defeated posture that comes from carrying too much financial pressure. Mom was wearing an old dress I remembered from years ago, instead of the designer clothes she usually preferred. The designer handbags and expensive jewelry she used to flaunt were nowhere to be seen. Blake wasn't even with them. Apparently, he was too embarrassed to face me. According to my parents, he was exploring other opportunities and didn't want to complicate the family discussion. Translation: he was hiding in their basement, probably playing video games, and letting our parents clean up his mess while he avoided responsibility. "Thanks for meeting with us," my mom said as they sat down. "Of course, family is important," I said, letting that word hang in the air. We ordered food and made small talk for a few minutes before Dad finally got to the point. I could see how uncomfortable he was having to ask his daughter for money. This was a man who had built a successful business from nothing, who had always been the provider and decision-maker in our family, now reduced to begging for financial help from the kid he'd consistently dismissed and overlooked. "Lolita, we know we messed up badly. We know we treated you unfairly for years, and we know we made terrible decisions with Blake's business." This was the first time I'd ever heard my father admit to making mistakes with Blake. For 29 years, every decision involving Blake had been justified as supporting his potential or investing in his future. Hearing Dad finally acknowledge that these decisions were actually mistakes was incredibly satisfying. "Go on. We're desperate. If we can't get help in the next month, we'll lose the house. I'll have to sell the business for whatever I can get, which won't be much given the debt load." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds really stressful." We were hoping you might be able to help us financially. Even a loan would make a huge difference." There it was, the ask. "How much were you thinking?" My dad looked relieved that I was even considering it. "If you could loan us $100,000, that would give us breathing room to restructure the other debts and save the house." $100,000. Less than a quarter of what they'd given Blake, but still a massive amount. "That's a lot of money," I said. "We know, but your business is doing so well now, and we'd pay you back with interest, of course." I took a bite of my steak and thought about it theatrically. I've been thinking a lot about family dynamics lately, about how different children get treated differently based on their parents' perceptions. They looked confused by the direction of the conversation. For example, some kids are seen as naturally gifted and deserving of investment and support. Other kids are seen as self-sufficient and expected to figure things out on their own. Understanding started dawning on their faces. The thing is, when you treat kids differently like that, you teach them different lessons. The kid who gets everything handed to him learns that success should come easily and that other people will always bail him out. The kid who has to earn everything learns to be self-reliant and resourceful. "Lolita," my mom started. "Let me finish. So, here's the situation. You invested $475,000 in Blake's business based on nothing but his charm and Emma's encouragement. You never asked for a real business plan. You never required him to prove concept, and you never held him accountable for results." They were both staring at their plates now. "Meanwhile, when I asked for $50,000 to start a legitimate business with real clients and realistic projections, you told me I was too independent and needed to figure it out myself." "We made mistakes," my dad said quietly. "Yes, you did, but here's the thing about mistakes. They have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what people need to learn from their poor choices." I signaled the waiter for the check. "So, here's my answer to your request for help. No." My mom's eyes filled with tears. "Lolita, please. You told me to figure it out myself when I needed help. So now I'm telling you the same thing. Figure it out yourselves. But we're family, my dad said desperately. Family works both ways. You didn't treat me like family when I needed support. You treated me like the responsible one who didn't deserve help. I stood up from the table. But I'm not completely heartless. I'll make Blake an offer. He can come work for me doing basic labor. Starting pay is $18 an hour. He'll show up on time, follow instructions, and earn every dollar. If he proves he can handle that for 6 months, maybe we'll talk about more responsibility. My dad looked hopeful. That's very generous. Don't thank me yet. Blake will have to swallow his pride and work for his sister doing manual labor. Based on his track record, I doubt he'll last a week. I put money on the table to cover my meal. The job offer stands for 30 days. After that, you're on your own. As I walked away, I could hear my mom crying quietly at the table. 2 weeks later, Blake showed up at one of my job sites. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing old clothes, and clearly having lost weight. Pride broken. Lolita, I need that job. What job? The labor position you offered. I need the work. I looked at him for a long moment. Why should I hire you? You've never finished anything you started. Because I don't have any other choice. Emma's gone. I'm living in Mom and Dad's basement, and I can't get hired anywhere else because word got around about the business failure. And you think you can handle taking orders from your twin sister? Blake's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll do whatever you need. I handed him a hard hat and work gloves. You start at the bottom. You'll be carrying materials, cleaning up job sites, and doing whatever the crew chiefs tell you. No special treatment because you're my brother. For 3 days, Blake actually showed up on time and worked hard. I was starting to think maybe he'd finally learned something. Then on Thursday morning, he didn't show up. When I called him, he said he'd found something better and wouldn't be wasting his potential on manual labor anymore. The something better turned out to be a multi-level marketing scheme selling overpriced supplements. Emma had come back into his life and convinced him this was his real opportunity to build wealth. She'd apparently been researching passive income opportunities while they were apart and had decided that network marketing was the future. Blake's new venture was with some company called Elite Wellness Solutions that sold protein powders and supplements at ridiculous markup prices. The business model was typical MLM garbage. Recruit other people to sell products and focus more on building your downline than actually selling to consumers. Emma was all over social media again, posting about financial freedom and entrepreneurial mindset. She changed her Instagram bio to digital marketing entrepreneur and started hosting Facebook Live sessions about breaking free from the 9-to-5 mindset. Blake spent $3,000 on an initial inventory package and another $2,000 on marketing materials. Within 3 months, he had managed to recruit exactly 2 people into his downline, both college friends who bought starter packages out of pity. Blake's own sales totaled less than $500, mostly to family members who felt obligated to support him. 6 months later, that venture had also failed, and Blake was back to being unemployed and living with our parents. The supplement inventory was still sitting in their garage, slowly approaching expiration dates. Blake owed Elite Wellness Solutions money for additional products he'd ordered on credit, and Emma had once again disappeared from his life when the money ran out. Meanwhile, my business continued growing at a pace that surprised even me. I now have 8 employees, a workshop facility, and contracts booked out for the next year. I bought a house in a nice neighborhood and drive a truck that I own outright. My annual revenue hit $800,000 last year, and I'm on track for over $1.2 million this year. The success wasn't just financial. It was professional and personal satisfaction that I'd never experienced before. My clients respected my work. My employees looked up to me as a leader. Other contractors in the area knew me as someone who delivered quality projects on time and on budget. I was building something real and lasting, something that provided value to customers and created jobs for good people. My parents, on the other hand, lost the house and had to move into a small rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. The house they'd lived in for 25 years, where Blake and I grew up, got foreclosed on after they defaulted on the mortgage payments. Dad's business got bought by a competitor for cents on the dollar after he defaulted on his loans. Mom's working extra hours at the credit union just to make ends meet, and she's talked about having to postpone retirement indefinitely. Blake is 30 years old and still living with them in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment, still looking for his big break. He sleeps on a pull-out couch in the living room because they can't afford a place with a 3rd bedroom. He's applied for dozens of jobs but can't get hired anywhere because word has gotten around about his business failures and work history. The few interviews he's gotten have ended poorly because Blake still carries himself like someone who's too good for entry-level positions. The beautiful irony is that being treated as the independent one actually made me independent. While Blake learned to expect handouts and bailouts, I learned to rely on myself and build something real. Last month, Blake called me one more time asking for help. He'd heard I was doing well and wondered if I might consider investing in his latest business idea. I told him I was too busy with actual paying customers to discuss imaginary ventures.